Joining me to discuss this now, former Met Police Detective Peter Bleksley. Hello, Peter. And when you arrived, you said actually there is a kind of, I don't know whether it's a perfect storm or a conflagration of police voices speaking out this afternoon from all sorts of areas about terrible problems with policing.
Yes, I know not whether this is coincidental because, of course, this article in The Sun about the armed police officers was published only recently.
Yes.
And we know they got quite militant last few weeks ago. But all of a sudden, from various quarters, I'm hearing rumblings of discontent coming from police officers, which is rather unusual because there is actually a criminal offence under the Police Act of creating disaffection amongst police officers. And a police officer could be jailed for 2 years if they went around saying, aren't we having a bad time? What are we going to do about it? Let's rise up, for example. That said, a senior officer, a chief superintendent, gone on social media this afternoon, publicly expressing his discontent, talking about how they haven't got the funding, they're not able to do the job. This other very well-respected police officer taking to social media and saying, we can't do what the public wants of us. We have the Evening Standard newspaper in London saying there's a £250 million black hole in the Met Police's budget. And from other quarters now, it seems like we're having an afternoon of discontent from police officers who are finding their voice.
Right, let's focus first on the firearms officers and then move to the bigger picture. So firearms officers are saying, we don't want to do this job. It's not worth it to us. It's not worth it for the money. We don't want the risk to our lives and our families and our reputations destroyed should we, in the course of duty, fire our weapons. We don't want to be prosecuted for murder or anything else. We don't want to end up in prison for doing our jobs. We're not doing it. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I kind of understand their grumblings, but I had the gun oil under my fingernails. I was an authorised firearms officer back in the day, and I thought long and hard about, did I join the police to potentially take someone's life as opposed to saving somebody's life? I decided that the crooks were having guns more often, so I better have one. There are different levels of armed police officers. There are, of course, the ones that protect the Houses of Parliament and Downing Street and such like. And that department spawned two of the worst monsters ever to wear a police uniform. There are the armed response vehicles, the ones that will respond to a 999 call if there is a gun or suspected weapon involved. Then you go up to the sort of highest level of training, and they're the counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers, astonishingly fit, incredibly highly trained for all manner of situations. Different levels. They're all potentially going to have their finger on the trigger at some point, and they all could deliver a fatal shot, which means, of course, their actions would quite rightly be subjected to a lot of scrutiny. But the discontent is stemming from the fact that the investigations into their actions are not perceived as being independent. They are slow. The procedure takes years and years and years. There's one firearms officer still under investigation from 2015.
Goodness me.
When he shot a man, and a coroner's inquest and a public inquiry both ruled that he was lawfully shot, and yet there's a misconduct hearing yet to be heard. So that's what they're particularly concerned about, the amount of scrutiny and the fact that it's not seen to be fair, balanced, timely and impartial.
All right, let's take the discussion now beyond firearms officers, which is what we were supposed to be discussing, and into this, as we've said, outpouring of discontent from various highly respected members of the profession, police officers, some of whose names are out in the open, some of whom are not, but you know who they are and most people are aware of who these people are. So what are they saying fundamentally when they say we cannot do our job? What are they lacking? It's not just money, is it?
That is it, although they're talking about support.
Right.
That word featured very heavily.
Right.
Officers are not being supported.
What does that mean?
That means that the sergeants and the inspectors are not there to support them. And of course, they're not there to condone wrongdoing, but they're not there to look for something that is wrong with each and every action. They should be there to essentially support, never, of course, condone wrongdoing, but support. And officers are feeling utterly unsupported. The expression that they use so often is that bosses will throw them under the bus at the first opportunity. And what particularly has happened this afternoon and has created some very, very unsavoury exchanges on social media is the news broke from the Independent Office of Police Conduct that an officer has been charged in relation to a woman who was stopped because it was believed she hadn't paid a bus fare. And an officer has now been charged with assault on that woman. We will, of course, not touch that because the court will have to make a decision.
Sure.
But there is a lot of discontent around that.
Yes.
The IOPC have made a very juvenile kind of message directed towards the Metropolitan Police, and many people are joining in, expressing their discontent.
I remember, though, covering years ago, Cressida Dick, the then, I don't think she was chief at the time, but, you know, and she did the thing of sticking up for officers. It was said in various reports, and in one instance, a couple of incidents, things were covered up, that there were kind of, you know, there was protectionism going on within the force. And I suppose this is the absolute kind of opposite, the antithesis of that, isn't it? It's instead of being supported inside the force, maybe that can be overdone and sometimes not always judicious and not always right or correct, but the opposite, being thrown under the bus rather than looked after from within.
Cressida Dick was foolish and foolhardy to say everything is fine. Everything's fine. My officers are heroic. They are wonderful. When, of course, not soon after she'd headed for the exit door, some of the worst behaviour and criminality
so we're
by
talking about
police.
Wayne Couzens, aren't we?
Those dark corners that had been allowed to fester because she was there front and centre saying, my police service is wonderful, when it fundamentally was not, is equally as bad as anybody who would, of course, turn the other way, look the other way. So there has been a crisis in policing for a long, long time. And anybody who's familiar with what I've been doing for over 2 decades, I've been saying this for many years, as have others. But it just appears this afternoon that for almost, I think, the first time, a number of other disparate voices from within policing are saying things similar to what I and others have been saying for a while. And that is quite a sea change.
It certainly is. Now, on this programme, all too often, I have representatives of august institutions like the water companies, like the NHS, senior people, senior professionals who've worked in these things, institutions for years, saying, to my absolute horror and the horror of anybody watching or listening, the NHS is broken. You know, the water companies are broken. The fire service, we've heard people saying on this programme, the fire service is broken, not fit for purpose, just not working. And I wonder whether what we're really hearing this afternoon is that the police service isn't working, is not fit for purpose, is broken.
I think most people know that. If you've been unfortunate enough to have your phone, bike, car stolen, your house burgled, or be a shopkeeper, or, of course, the real elephant in the room, be a victim of fraud, and millions of people have been, you will know only too well and sadly that you do not get an investigation in the overwhelming majority of those cases. So policing is failing us. It has actually subcontracted the investigation of crimes back to victims because they say, well, have you got any CCTV? Do you know who did it? Oh, sorry, we can't help you. So many people know that policing is in crisis, but to have these voices from within who have so often been staunch defenders, sometimes of the indefensible, now saying, yeah, we're in trouble, that's different.